Okay, so now it seems to be slowing down with new people joining. So welcome everyone. I'm really happy to see that we have so many participants today, more than 70 people registered from, I think, 18 or 19 countries, if I remember correctly. So very good turnout, despite this beautiful weather that we have, at least in Stockholm, Sweden, where I'm based. So if you would like to ask questions to the speakers today, then please use the Q&A function in Zoom. If you would like the international sign language interpretation that we provide, then use the interpretation functionality in Zoom. And this is rather new, the new feature. So you should click on the globe, the sign language interpretation icon in Zoom, and then you will have the opportunity to see the sign language in a separate window. And you have flexibility to move around this window to place it where it suits you best, and also to change the size of the window. So this is a really positive improvement of sign language interpretation in Zoom. We also do provide live captions today, and we present those as closed captions. So just use the CC function in Zoom, or if you prefer the stream text version, if you prefer to have the text separately, we do provide that as well. So there is a link in the chat for those of you who prefer that. This is a validation workshop, which means that we will ask you questions, and you are of course welcome also to ask us questions. My name is Susanna Loren. I'm the Chief Research and Innovation Officer at Funka, and today I am here together with my colleague Peter Kemeny, and we will present the UPower project for you and ask you loads of questions over these 1.5 hours. So the agenda of the day is a little bit of welcome and housekeeping, and also introduction. Then we are going to move over to the UPower project, or the UPower Users Power the Web Accessibility Directive, which is the full name of the UPower project. So we are going to present the project to you, and also the results we have achieved so far in the project. We still have 8 months or so to go, and we have already been working with this for quite a long time. So we are eager to present the results to you. Then we are going to present also the curriculum at an overall basis, so not in detail, but really the different parts and aspects of it, and ask you questions as to validate whether the curriculum setup is something you think could be useful for you as an end user or disabled persons organization providing training or receiving training for your members, or if you are a training provider of some sort, or public sector body, or whoever you are. And we will ask you to tell us a little bit more about yourself in a minute. Then we're shortly going to sum up the next steps of the project so that you know what is happening after this. And there is, of course, a possibility for an open discussion and Q&A anytime. Just use the Q&A function and we will respond to your questions at a suitable time during the webinar. We will, of course, also have a short break in the middle so that everyone can stretch their legs and take a new cup of coffee. So the first question we have today is, who are you? We would like to know who you are participating as, if you are representing somebody or if you're just here as yourself. So you can choose to be participating as a vocational education training provider, so VAT provider, or an organization for people with disabilities, just as a separate individual, not representing really anyone, public sector body, an ICT professional, an accessibility expert, something to do with the university, higher education or research, or something else. If we haven't picked your sector, then you can just click other. And I believe my colleague can see when people stop voting. So Peter, you can decide when you want to close the poll and show the results to us. Thank you. So we have no VAT providers today. We have 30% people from representing organizations of people with disabilities. 5% say that they represent themselves. 20% from the public sector. 10% from the ICT sector, and 10% being accessibility experts. And then we have 20% from university or research. So that's really good. We would have hoped to get more VAT providers in as well, but we are very happy with having such a good representation from the organizations of persons with disabilities. So now we know who we are talking to, which will then be interesting when we come further in the validation process to see with this background, what answers do we get or responses do we get to the questions that we ask. So first, a little bit about Funka. We are a consultancy, but we were founded when we began as a not-for-profit organization founded by the disability movement in Sweden. In the year 2000, we were turned into a privately owned company, which we are still today. And we are mainly doing analysis or audits of digital environments, of course, training and a lot of support, so consultancy around accessibility. We also have a department carrying out research and innovation at European level, like the U-Power project, and other national projects as well. We do collaborate closely with end users and disabled persons organizations, especially in the research and innovation department. And we also work with policy, regulations, standards, and we do studies on behalf of the European Commission and national governments and so on. So we work very high and low and at all levels, trying to improve accessibility as much as we can. We're also one of the proud founders of the International Association of Accessibility Professionals, IAAP. So why do we do research? Well, the easy answer to that is that research is still needed. No matter what part of the disability community or disability world you are talking to, there's still many things we as society don't know yet. And especially, I think that is true when it comes to the digital arena. And that is also a sector where everything moves really fast, and technical development can make anyone kind of car sick because it's so fast developing, not least now with AI and everything. But we still need to know, how does all these new gadgets and ideas and features really work for people with disabilities? And if we don't know that, then we can never recommend anyone to use anything of these new fancy things coming up in the market. So we still need research. And of course, we cannot ask our clients to pay for all this research, because sometimes we need to really get very nerdy and into details with things. So that is why we are also writing proposals and getting funding from several different funding instruments to be able to focus on research this way. And the research we do, the projects we carry out, they can come about from 3 different sources, if you will, or the ideas can come from 3 different parts. So either we have an idea ourselves, we find something, or we stumble over something, or we get irritated or frustrated over something, and we think this needs to be researched better. We need to make sure to test and know how this specific technology or issue works for people with disabilities, and then we would like to create a research project around it. Or it could be somebody coming to us. Often this is the disabled persons organizations or universities or consumer organizations, or could also be private companies, public sectors. They come to us and say, this is something we cannot solve on our own, and we really need to collaborate with somebody and maybe get extra funding as well to solve this issue, or to investigate this, or to make sure that we have the right recommendations. So we get a lot of questions and invitations from outside of the organization. And the third piece of this is, of course, that a funding instrument has, like the European Commission, has a specific call where they ask for projects focusing on this specific area. And these days, many of those calls have to do with climate change and things like that. But every now and then, it's also specific calls on inclusion or accessibility or other innovative participation in society for vulnerable groups and things like that. So these are the 3 paths into a research project from our point of view. And then we have specific selection criteria for saying yes and really working with the project, or even working with the proposal for a project, because that is, of course, a big step also to invest time in writing the proposal. So when we look at projects, and specifically invitations for projects that we get from organizations, then we want to make sure that the idea of this project is really solving a real problem. So there are some projects that seems to be done more because somebody wants money for a project, but we want to have something really tangible and something that means something to people with disabilities, so that we know that we are solving something that is a problem for real. The second criteria is that we want to work with serious partners. And of course, when we turn to the disabled persons organizations, then we know that we have serious partners, but also when we choose other partners, we need to make sure that they have the same values that we have, and that we want to work with them during a long period of time. And then it's important for us to only collaborate in projects where we can be part of the solution, and the knowledge we have and the experience that is needed to make this solution. So we do not write proposals on behalf of others and get paid for the proposal writing. That's another business, but we don't do that. We only write proposals if our experience and our knowledge can be part of solving this issue. And then we look at the potential for funding. We do not want to use time writing proposals that no one is then funding, because then it will never be the reality. So I think we're very good at saying no to things, because we only pick the ones that we think have a really good opportunity or a possibility to get funding. And that is really the trick, to choose the ones that has this potential. And then, of course, kind of the overarching criteria is to contribute to a better world, that whatever this project is, the result of the project should really make a change for people with disabilities, because that is why we're doing what we're doing. We do have a very user-centered approach in the Research and Innovation Department. We do a lot of user testing in almost everything we do. There is one way or another test with real humans and with users. We also work a lot with focus groups to make sure that we can create a good discussion among users, and not only the kind of the test environment, but also to have a more informal way of getting to know the user needs and user aspects of the different things that we need to look into. We do quite a lot of interviews with people from different sectors. So sometimes we can do a survey, but an interview usually get more in depth, and we get to know more when we have a dialogue with the user or the stakeholder in a way. And then we also have a test panel, so that we build a group of people that can do testing for all the different bits and pieces that we need to test, so that we have people with different abilities and assistive technologies and age and gender and education and so on, so that we really have a diverse group of testers that we can work with when needed. And we do believe, even though it may sound very naive or silly, that if we work together across sectors specifically, we like to work with many different stakeholders, so research and end user organizations and industry and public sector and so on. When all these stakeholders work together, then our experience is that we can really make a change. And that is what we strive for in the research that we do. So the second question today is whether you consider yourself a person with a disability. And the same thing here, you can put the poll up here so you can respond to it. So, do you consider yourself a person with a disability? So, and the options here are yes, no, or prefer not to say. So 33% answers yes, I consider myself a person with disability, and 67% answers no, I do not consider myself a person with a disability. So close to the percentage of people claiming to represent a disabled person's organization. And often we see a difference between those two polls. So it's interesting today we seem to have a little bit more separated audience with and without accessibility issues here. Okay, so I don't see any questions so far. So maybe I should leave the floor to my colleague Peter to talk a little bit about the U-Power project.
Hello, yes. So we're here today to mainly talk about the U-Power WAD or Users Powered Web Accessibility Directive project and the curriculum, which we will share with you a bit later, the details, and then we'll talk about that. So this is a European project, an Erasmus funded project, and yeah. And of course, we are not doing it alone. We're doing it with very good partners. We have the Technical University of Dortmund from Germany. Then we have the European Blind Union located in France, but it is a European umbrella organization for persons with visual disabilities, visually impaired people. Then we have Synthesis Center from Cyprus. They are vocational education experts, and of course us, FUNCA, which we presented a bit more in detail before. And we have also very distinguished associated partner, the European Disability Forum, an umbrella organization of European disability organizations. And they help and provide support and ensure that we reach a wide audience throughout. So, as we mentioned, it is an European project. It's an Erasmus project. We started in 2021 and finish early next year. So there's a lot of work done already, and some more left. But to understand what this is all about, I think the best is to talk a bit about the background, the policy and the legal background. So we have the Web Accessibility Directive at the European level, and all member states had to, and they did create the parallel equal laws themselves. So in each member state, for public sector bodies, it is an obligation to make their websites and mobile application accessible. And there's three ways basically how the law helps or facilitates that accessibility is improved. So there's the supervisory bodies, there's the monitoring bodies and enforcement bodies in each member state that check websites and mobile apps and try to enforce that is through communication with public sector bodies that web accessibility is improved. Then, of course, there are the public sector bodies themselves, authorities and municipalities, who have to make their websites and apps accessible. And then there's the users as well, and first and foremost. So all of these three levels, they actually have a tool provided. The monitoring and enforcement bodies, the monitoring bodies do monitoring and supervise and public sector websites. And then the authorities and municipalities, they have to publish an accessibility statement to their websites and mobile applications, which basically states the level of accessibility of the website, and it says if something is not accessible, it's a good guidance both for monitoring bodies and the users. And the users have the possibility to provide feedback. Now, that possibility is a bit stronger than in general, because usually you have a possibility to provide feedback, but the law says that the public sector bodies have to provide a so-called feedback mechanism. So there has to be a mechanism, a way, a channel or more channels where their users can provide feedback. It's kind of institutionalized. And these three instruments are also dynamically linked together. So the monitoring bodies monitor websites or authorities and municipalities. If they are lucky, municipalities and authorities have their websites checked and get a monitoring report from the monitoring agencies. So there's a link there. Then based on that, they can improve their websites and they can update their accessibility statement. Then there's a top to bottom approach. There's a bottom up approach where the users provide feedback to the public sector bodies directly, and that will be our main topic today. And of course, it goes then the other way around as well, because if a public sector body is monitored, then they can, of course, discuss the results and ask for suggestions or help from the monitoring body. So it should be a dialogue. And on the other hand, if a public sector body receives a feedback, they should also, of course, react to it, ideally by fixing the errors or problems, but anyhow to start a dialogue or at least to respond to the users. So it's a very dynamic setup, and it works in most parts. So we've seen the monitoring reports from the member states 2 years ago, and they show that there's monitoring going on, there's improvement on the websites, and there's a really good communication usually between the public sector bodies and the monitoring agencies. Then we've seen that accessibility statements did appear. Unfortunately, not all websites have accessibility statement, but there's a big change from before the legislation. What is not working yet perfectly is the feedback mechanism. It is there, but more than one research shows that it is not really used up to its potential. And that's what this project is about, is to address this untapped potential. So we have the users with disabilities with a lot of knowledge and experience about what works and what doesn't work. And we have the possibility that they give feedback to the public sector bodies. And then on the other hand, we have the website owners who sometimes struggle to make their websites accessible. It's not on purpose. Usually what we've seen, sometimes they don't know how to do it. They don't know they need to do it. And then, of course, there are huge websites with more 10,000 pages, where it's difficult to keep an eye on everything. And then the websites are dynamic, editors add new articles, there's human factor to it, so it can deteriorate even very accessible websites. So that's where it comes in, that's when feedback comes in. Users who use it, who find these problems, they have the possibility to give this feedback. And what we've seen, if public sector bodies receive these feedbacks, they are actually happy about it. They're happy to learn about the errors and they aim to fix it. So what are we talking about? What is a feedback mechanism? We show you two examples here. This is a simple example which says that the user can either write an email if they found an accessibility issue, or there's a phone number, or there's a postal address as well, which means that they can maybe even present themselves in person if that's the preference. We'll talk a bit about it shortly, that it is important to have more than one feedback channel because user needs can differ. And then another example, which is kind of the other end of the spectrum, is a feedback form which guides the user regarding what details to share. So here it is describe the issue, then to give the web page URL where the problem occurs, and some technical details like operating system. And the feedback mechanism can mix these things, they can vary along this spectrum. And there are also other channels. It can be a chat or a video chat as well, provided where the users can provide feedback. So the mechanism is there in most of the cases. What the project is about, how to make use of it, how to get to the point where users use the feedback mechanism, providing very valuable feedback for the website owners. So we did a bit of a research. First step was to understand the needs of the users. So in the first part of the project, we did surveys, interviews, we disseminated questionnaires to learn about what is that is blocking the users in providing feedback if they want to. It's very important to say that this is an opportunity and a possibility, but it's never an obligation. So at no point of the project we think or say that the users should or have to give a feedback. If they are willing to do it, great. And that's where we want to help to break down the barriers for users who would like to give feedback or would give feedback, but for example, they have a bad experience in the past because there was no reaction, or they simply just cannot find the feedback mechanism. So we looked at different aspects, and then we create support materials both for users and website owners in the first part of the project. We did research on what is that's hindering feedback, so how website owners can create a more welcoming environment for feedback, can create a better working feedback mechanism, and then also to support users what to look for, where to look for the feedback mechanism, and then some practical advice as well. So we created a toolkit, best practice repository already, which I will talk shortly about in the next slides. And then now we are in the process of creating a curriculum. The final biggest idea in this project is to create training for users so they can live up to this feedback potential, and then to empower them to provide feedback. And it would result in a win-win situation, not only to provide feedback, but to provide what we call actionable feedback. So feedback that is really helping from the beginning, possibly for website owners to fix their issues. So that is the background. And at this point, we would like to ask two questions. First of all is about the awareness. If you knew about the feedback mechanism, or that there's a possibility to give feedback, and I launched the poll. So let's see. We'll wait a bit until possibly more than 3/4 of the participants have responded. So far it happened before. So the main question is, did you know that you can give feedback? We are mainly referring to the feedback mechanism and the possibility that that the legislation provides. And I think we are more or less getting saturated with the answers. So I'll end the poll and share the results. It is shared. You can see it. It's basically 2/3 of the audience have heard about the possibility to give feedback, then nearly 20% no, and another 20% is not sure. So this is different. For these results are a bit more optimistic than what we've learned through our research before, but that's a reoccurring phenomenon. Of course, people who are attending to most of the people who are attending to this workshop already have a previous knowledge, and that's very many of you joined. So this shows a better picture than the global reality is, but it also shows that still among the participants here or attendees here, there's kind of 1/3 who either didn't hear about it or not sure. So I think I find that very important. And then I'll go to the next question, which is for those who've heard about web accessibility feedback mechanism, is whether you have ever provided feedback on web accessibility. It's either through the official web feedback channel, but anyhow by like using the general contact on a website, or just if you had an opportunity to talk directly to web administrator. So at all, have you ever provided feedback on web accessibility until now? Okay, we have all the no, okay. We wait a bit. I misread results. But of course, I mean, we expect answers from those who've heard about it. So I think we more or less have all the answers we expected. So the result says that among those who've heard about the feedback mechanism, kind of 1/3, a bit more than 1/3 have provided feedback, and 2/3, 60% have not. So that's part of what we are looking into. What can be the reason for that? And just to share a bit what we found before, there can be many reasons. As I mentioned, maybe you've heard about the feedback possibility, but you haven't, when you had an issue, you haven't found the feedback mechanism, or the feedback page or the accessibility statement and the feedback page was not accessible, or there was no channel that you could use that would be appropriate for your user needs. And then there's, of course, historical reasons, so to say, where maybe you have given feedback before to public sector body about something else and you didn't receive an answer, or it's not very probable, but maybe you received a rude answer. So there are many reasons for that, as you've seen, and the aim is to break down those barriers. Okay, so now I would shortly, is there any, if you have any questions, then please, in the meantime, please write into the Q&A box. And we'll answer them. I'll go on and talk a bit about our project results, which have been already published. So we have published a toolkit, which is a supporting material for users and public sector bodies. And this is kind of the summary of the research we did in the beginning. And then the results here are considered and used in the curriculum as well. So in the toolkit, we describe the different feedback formats, what I shown, email, the different channels, email, form, phone call, other possibilities. They all have their specialties, and both the website owners should know about that, and it's useful for users as well to learn about what are the specificities for the different feedback formats. But then we also discussed the content of the feedback shortly, what should be part of the feedback, what users may share when they provide a feedback about the website, and on the other side, how website owners can facilitate to get the information they need. And the toolkit also talks about challenges, mainly challenges for the users for providing feedback. We talked a bit about those, or I talked a bit about those before. So as well, the toolkit looks at challenges, and I think it lists like 6 or 7, and from both sides, how public sector bodies could address those challenges and how actually can, in some cases, how users can overcome them. And that's the last kind of part of the toolkit. It gives tips on how to address the challenges. And here we share the link for the toolkit, which we also put in the chat. So please feel free to have a look at it. And the other
so you need to read out the URL, please.
Thank you. So it's https www.funka.com/en/upower, so UPOWER hyphen toolkit, and that is the address. So it's www.funka.com/en/upower-toolkit. It is a PDF document which is accessible, so it's there for everybody to consult it. And then the other outcome is a good practice repository. So we looked around what is out there. We had a survey and then a set of interviews with public sector bodies who have feedback mechanisms with good practices. And then that's what we collected in the so-called best practice repository. And here is 3 examples so you can have an idea. First is, of course, the legislation says that there should be a link to the feedback mechanism. The requirement is that it's from the accessibility statement, but it's a very good practice to actually provide a direct link on each page. And that's what you can see on the image here. There's a report barrier button in the footer of the web page of the website, so users can directly press that button, which comes with an extra facility or an extra feature, usually, that it in some cases it also gives the URL to the feedback where this report barrier button was pressed, so the feedback automatically can know which is the problematic page, which is the web page with the accessibility issues. So that's one example for good practices. Then another example is what we mentioned, to have more than one channel. So users with different user needs can provide feedback. Here we can see on the image that there's a form possibility, but also there's an email and there's a phone number. And there are some instructions, which is also a good practice for the user, how to write an email, what to put in the subject line, for example, so it gets to the right place. And then a third example is the possibility to send documents with your feedback. It is very useful, of course, if the user wants to do it to show exactly where the problem is, to provide a screenshot, for example, but it's also, it provides the possibility that a user can provide actually feedback with a video message, so recording the feedback and send it as a file. So that the repository has around 30 best practices listed, and it's also available on the project website. I will share the link here. I put it in the chat soon, and I read it out. It's www.funka.com/en/upower-repository. So very similar to the previous web address. And now you have it in the chat as well. It's the same. You are very welcome to have a look and consult it. We think it's a good overarching document, and it will be a very useful tool or a support tool for public sector bodies to make their websites more accessible, make their feedback mechanisms more accessible. So that is what we've reached the project so far, and also you had an overview, and I think it would be the best time for a coffee break. We are around half time.
So maybe we got, sorry to interrupt you, Peter, but we got a question from the audience that I think we could take, because we still have 3 minutes until it's 45. So this is a question from Andre. So hi, Andre, good to see you again, even if I can't see you. So the question is, unfortunately, the monitoring does not work, and the same with the false accessibility statements, and pretty much zero reaction to feedback. Is there any possibility of solving those violations to the at the European Union level? And I must say, thank you for the question. It's a good one, but it doesn't really correspond or align with what we found in the review of the Web Accessibility Directive. So I'm a bit surprised that you are this negative, and I would be really interesting to hear where this is so bad, because they're absolutely not, the enforcement procedures are not perfect, and we do see a lack of feedback, absolutely. Also, some of the monitoring agencies say that they still struggle with getting the public sector bodies making better accessibility statements, but to claim that the monitoring doesn't work, I think is a little bit stretching it, at least in my mind. Can something be done at the EU level? Well, in theory, yes, but I mean, the monitoring should be done at national level. So if this is a problem in a specific country, then it should first be addressed to the monitoring and enforcement body, and then maybe to that government, and then you could go to the European Union. But if you have specific complaints about this, I mean, there's a feedback mechanism. If that doesn't work, then the idea of the enforcement procedure is that you have the right to escalate this feedback to the complaints mechanism. So that would be the first step for any user that thinks that the accessibility feedback doesn't work. So we don't really touch on that in this presentation, but of course that's also kind of part of the feedback, because if the feedback between the user and the public sector body doesn't work, then if you don't get an answer, or if you don't get an answer you're happy with, or if you don't get an answer fast enough, then you have always the option to escalate this to a real complaints, and that becomes then a question for the monitoring body to either do monitoring or to handle that complaint in a best possible way. So, but again, I would be happy to discuss with you offline on exactly what examples you have, because that I think is something that the Commission would be also interested in hearing. And with that, it's 2:45, at least in my computer, and that is now the truth, because I'm the host. So I would, what do you say, Peter? Do we have 15 minutes or 10 minutes? How much coffee do you need?
I had a lot. But
yes.
I think we should aim for a 10-minute break.
Yes. Okay. So we'll meet again 5 to 3 Central European summertime, and please do stretch your legs, do something else, have a little bit of water or juice or something, and relax for a while, and see you again in 10 minutes. Thank you.
See you soon.
So welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a good break, and I hope we have the sign language interpretation with us. So let's go on with the second part of this little workshop. Yes, so what we are really focusing on now in the project is the curriculum, and that is, of course, reflecting the training modules that we have created, and that is divided into 3 different parts. So the first module is about web accessibility. So just describing the terminology and what web accessibility is about and who it is for and so on. And this may not be used by all training providers or all students, because I'm sure some of the groups that will use this training is already very well aware about what web accessibility is, but since we every now and then meet people who where this is a little bit still blurred, or maybe they have an idea of what accessibility can be for some groups, but don't know exactly what it is for all groups, we thought it would be good to start with really describing what web accessibility is. The second part of the training is to understand what feedback is, how it can be used and useful, and why it is so important to not only the public sector body, but actually for everyone, because when this feedback loop does work and users provide feedback and the website owners can remediate inaccessible issues, then this could also benefit, of course, the whole society, and we could get more accessible websites and apps coming out of that. It's also like training public sector bodies. And then the third module is focusing on actionable feedback. So this is more hands-on for users to make sure that, first of all, everyone feel comfortable in providing feedback, because we have heard from users that say, I don't feel technical enough, I don't know enough about the legislation, or I'm not sure if it's me or my computer or my connection or my assistive technology. I mean, I don't know where the problem is, I just know that it doesn't work. And then we really want to encourage the users to provide feedback anyway, because it's not on the user to decide whether this is an accessibility issue or that should be solved by the public sector body or not. So better too much feedback than too little. So the actionable feedback is really about providing clear as clear information as you can, and we try to explain and give some tips on how you can do that, and also what kind of feedback methods that can provide you or support you in a way that that it makes it easier to provide actionable feedback. So it's very okay for anyone to just say that this website is super bad and I hate you. That is legally okay to do, but maybe this is not so constructive, and maybe that won't lead to much. So we are hoping that the users will try to be a little bit more constructive. Be nice is a good thing, and also to give users the tools to provide feedback that is actually actionable, so that the website owners can do something with the feedback and improve their interfaces. So the first module on web accessibility is really describing what web accessibility is about. And then it talks about the user needs, so the variety of user groups and target audiences, and how different user groups use the web and where the barriers can be found. And also a little bit about the Web Accessibility Directive, so just how this legislation works, so that you know which organizations are in scope of the directive, so where you can expect to find an accessibility statement and a feedback mechanism, and also who is kind of responsible for making their websites and apps accessible. And then I think Peter wants to go through the second module.
Yeah. Yes, here. So that was the background, what is web accessibility, and then the other two modules kind of, the second module says why feedback is important and how to do it, more or less, what to know about it. So it's called understanding feedback. First part is why is feedback important? So the curriculum details the extreme positive effect of providing feedback. As discussed before, it makes the website owners aware of accessibility issues. It is also empowering to know how to provide feedback is empowering for the users, so they can influence, although, to mention it again, it's never an obligation and it's always a responsibility for the website owner. But it is important to have a possibility of a dialogue between the information provider, the website owner, and the user. It improves also so-called digital participation of the users. Then when we talk about understanding feedback, again, we think it's important to enter into challenges and solutions around the feedback mechanisms, or the feedback process, because there are many things that can discourage a user to provide feedback or make it more difficult. So here the curriculum aims to kind of map them and to, where it's possible, to provide alternative ways. For example, just one example is when the accessibility statement is not, or the feedback mechanism is not accessible, then the user might use just a general contact possibility. Then the third part of the understanding feedback is to explain the user how, what are the possible channels where they can find it or them. Basically to explain that there should be more channels, and if there are more channels, that of course they might use the one that's most appropriate or easiest for them to use. This kind of increasing the knowledge of the users is also then in the long run hopefully affecting the provision of good feedback mechanisms, because then users might claim to the improvement at some point of the feedback mechanisms as well, if that is necessary. Then there's also an explanation of where to find the feedback mechanisms, and also how to overcome if it's the complexity. So the main message, two main messages are that you don't have to answer all the questions if you don't know the other answer. The feedback is still useful. And the other is that you don't need to be an accessibility expert to be able to provide feedback. So that leads us to the next part, or the last module of the curriculum, which is about actionable feedback. So how to provide feedback that can be used by the website owner. So this basically has three parts. One is what needs to be included in a feedback. So the user might explain in detail what is the issue, but also to explain how it hindered what they wanted to do. So how they, because of the accessibility issue, they couldn't do what they wanted to do. So it has a kind of a more dynamic approach. And so both are important part of the feedback. And then, of course, technically what needs to be included is where the issue is found, on which page, what is the issue, and possibly if the user has the knowledge, and then the assistive technology they might use, or what operating system is used. So the curriculum goes through all the details that are useful for the website owner to learn in order to be able to reproduce the issue, to find the issue, reproduce the issue, and in the end to fix the issue. These are kind of the main pillars of what needs to be included. The other part is how to describe the problem. So here, most important thing is if you have, if the user has web accessibility technical knowledge, then that's useful. If not, then it's also good if they, and important that they explain in their own, so say layman terms, what the problem is. The website owner should be able to understand the issue, because in the end, the website is for users. So if the user explains what was the problem, then the website owner should be able to fix it. This how to describe the problem has two parts mainly. One is what to talk about, and the other is to talk about in a way that your feedback is welcome. So as we said, in general, we found that public sector bodies are happy about receiving feedback, but of course it's a dialogue, and it's understandable if the user is angry about finding an accessibility issue, or not being, because of not being able to access the information they need. But the feedback mechanism and the dialogue can be fruitful only if it's not like an angry message that it's not working, but like a helpful, more or less detailed feedback from the user's part. Then the actionable feedback part explains more in technical detail as well the different parts of feedback that's useful and which are mostly listed in a feedback form if there's any. So again, where is the issue? What are the technical what is the technical environment the user uses? And then kind of there's two levels of giving feedback. There's a basic level and there's an expert level as well. So some feedback mechanism might give the possibility to go into more details technically. So the curriculum covers that as well, but again with the message that if you know it, good. If not, then you should be able to just jump or skip those parts of a feedback mechanism, because your feedback is still and always will be important. So that is the three those are the three modules which we found important and which the curriculum details. So now we would like to ask your opinion about the structure and the content of the curriculum as we shared here. Of course, you haven't seen it, but we think that one of the most important part to validate is if the scope of the aim is good, if there's anything we didn't mention and you think it should be included. So you are invited to write in the chat your opinion if you find that anything is missing, or also in that case if you think that something we mentioned is very important and you would express that yes, that should be an important focus of the curriculum. So it's about how to teach users to provide accessible feedback.
We know that some screen reader users may have problems with the chat, so you're also welcome to use the question and answer feature if that is easier for you. Of course, it's any way is good. Just give us your suggestions and ideas.
Okay. There's already one question in the chat. Are there any plans to promote the option to provide accessibility feedback to the users? A lot of them do not know about this option overall, and if you have any data in the research on how much this option is used currently and why users do not use it, shy not knowing about it, etc. Yes, definitely. The training would aim also to raise awareness. So if or when this training appears in the offerings of vocational education providers and is recommended by organizations of persons with disabilities, then we hope that this raises awareness as well. On the other hand, the Web Accessibility Directive already recognized the need for that. So there's an incentive that member states raise awareness of the web accessibility needs and also the feedback mechanisms. So it is definitely necessary. All research shows that there's a very low level of or proportion of feedback in different member states, according to the member state reports and the interviews we had. In some member states, there was no feedback at all.
But sorry, Peter, but we do not know that. Nobody knows that. Yeah. So our research and the official review has touched about that, and also research done by the European Disability Forum has also touched on this. And there are quite a lot of results in the first parts of this project also. So Andre, I ask you to read the deliverables first, but really we absolutely do not have any numbers on that, because when we made the WAD review, we talked to the monitoring agencies, and the monitoring agencies do not know about the feedback provided to the public sector bodies, because that is not part of the reporting. So unfortunately, there is no data on this. What we do know is kind of word of mouth, and that both public sector bodies and quite a few of the monitoring agencies claim that there is very little feedback trickling down that way. But if a user and a municipality has a discussion around feedback, there is a fair chance that that never ends up anywhere close to the monitoring body. So the truth is that nobody really knows. But the monitoring agencies and we and other researchers and the European Commission believe that this is still a big issue, because when we ask the users, we still get very low response rates from people saying that they have provided feedback. So that is the only kind of proof we have that this is still an issue. But all stakeholders are in agreement that feedback should be used and is not used enough. It's really an untapped potential here. So, and when it comes to promoting it, yes, this is what this project is about, and also other projects doing similar things. And this project also has, when we come to the next steps, a scaling up approach. So not only will this training be provided in English, French, German, and Swedish, we will also scale up to at least 5 other countries or languages, and make sure that end users with disabilities get this information as good as possible. And I foresee personally that we will continue to work with this long after the project has ended. So I think this is kind of an ongoing work for this.
And we have actually 2 questions in the question and answer little window. So one is, what is the usual way to prepare an accessibility statement and a feedback mechanism in EU countries if each public institution has their own, or there's a centralized national, or it's centralized at the national level, the help of monitoring organizations, and which will be the best option? So what we've seen both actually. In many countries, it is created by the public sector body themselves, which is good because then they can try different things and hopefully they communicate among each other, and in the longer run they can make it better. And in some countries there's a centralized accessibility statement. Well, in many countries there's a generator, and in at least one country there's a kind of a centralized accessibility statement. Luxembourg provides such thing, and Portugal is close to that, if I remember well. And as for the feedback mechanism, we've also seen in our research that in some countries it was very, very similar in each public sector body. So that has been probably centralized as well. Which is the best option? I think both have their advantages. I mean, if it's good, the central one, then it's a very good option. But I believe that at the beginning it is good also to give the possibility to different bodies to try their best and create.
So we haven't really researched that. We have no user data on what is the best thing for the user, but from a society perspective or the monitoring body, I mean, the accessibility statement has at least 2 main target audiences: is the monitoring body and the users. And from the monitoring body perspective, many member states claim that some sort of central system or tool would be easier for them, of course, but for the users, the jury is still out on that one, and we haven't researched it in this project, so we can't really tell. But there's really important to understand and remember always that we have 2 different target audiences for the accessibility statement.
And we have another.
So question. we didn't really get any answer to this. Instead, we started talking about other things. So I don't think we should try to follow the.
Yeah, we haven't received
So probably
And-
that means that everything is perfect. But if you think something is missing, or if you think something would be important for you, if you would like to use this training material, or what you would like to receive as a participant in this kind of training, then please share it with us. And if you do not want to share it right now, then please give us a call afterwards. We are happy to receive any feedback, because feedback is a gift. So please let us know. So in the project, we are now in this validation process, which will lead to finalizing the curriculum. So that is what we are doing next, except for having holidays in the summer and so on. But we will really try to make sure that the curriculum is the best possible. And as I mentioned, we have had validation, or we are still having, I think, currently validation workshops in the 4 different language areas that we cover in the project. And then we need to collect all that feedback that we get and make sure that we finalize or refine the curriculum even more before we publish it on the project website. Then during the autumn, the 4th phase or work package of this project is going to take place, and that is when we develop the support material. So really a guide or handbook on how to use the toolkit and the repository and the curriculum. So something really practical to make sure that this is used, and as we have heard, to promote it to the users and so on. And I think also quite a lot in this project is really useful also for the public sector bodies. So we have several target audiences that should be aware of this material and hopefully use it. And if we, in the scaling up part, we also would like to, of course, translate and kind of push it out to more member states as well. All of this is available for free and will be available for free, the deliverables that we haven't finalized yet on the project website. And as this is an Erasmus Plus project, it's also free for anyone to use. So you can use it in your own trainings or work with it as you prefer. And again, the long URL for the project website is funka.com/en/project in Swedish. So that's difficult. projekt/upower-wad. And I hope Peter can provide that URL in the chat as well. So this is where you can find the current results and also the upcoming ones. So the next question is just hypothetically, would you like to participate in a training on feedback? Is this something you could imagine being useful for you? So we have the 5th question here. Would you like to participate in a training on feedback? And the options are yes, no, or I don't know. And it's fine to say I don't know, because you have only we have only scratched the surface of this project, so you probably won't know, but you can think about another training, even if it's not this one. So would a training on feedback be interesting for you?
Wait a bit more. Yes, there are answers still coming in. And I think soon I will close the poll. Yes.
So 60% says yes, you would like to participate in a training on feedback. 7% says no, and 33% says I don't know, which is, I think, perfectly valid answer right now, because you don't know what you're responding to really. But 60% yes, I think that is very positive. So that's twice the percentage that claim to have a disability or be representing a disabled persons organization. So there's a group here who are interested in training on feedback, even though you don't identify yourself as part of the kind of the real target audience here. So I think that is very useful for us to know that even though we are just presenting really the high level things here, we still got a positive feedback from the audience. So thanks a lot for that. And I believe we have another question. So, and this is really when for the workshops where we have had VAT providers and training providers, but we did have some people from universities, so I think we can post this anyway. Could you imagine to include this material in your training offer? Yes, no, or I'm not sure. So this could also be, of course, if you're a public sector body and provide internal training, maybe for your communication officers or similar, then would you think that this kind of material, this training material would be useful for you? So could you imagine including it in the training that you provide or offer?
So I'm waiting a couple of seconds more, but I think everybody answered who wanted to, so I close the poll now and share the results.
Yes, and here is even more positive. 79% says yes, you could imagine including this material in your training offer. So that's very positive. Thank you for that. And 21% says I'm not sure, which is again very clear why you need to look at it before you can say yes or no for sure. So that is that was very I think rewarding for us to know that 60% are interested in getting more training on this, and almost 8% would like to use the training material that we have created in this project. So hopefully you will find the material and read it and use it when it's delivered. So now we have the time for questions, and apart from some of them that kind of sneaked in before, we have still one, and you are of course welcome to use the last couple of minutes here to answer, to raise questions on anything. We have one question here. In feedback, how important is the inclusion of code snippets versus describing where the issue is encountered? And I would say that's an impossible question to answer because it really depends. I'm sorry to sound like a politician, but I would say detecting where the problem is more important for most website owners in most cases. A code snippet is always good if this has to do with code, but I mean only about 30% of web accessibility issues has anything to do with code. So a code snippet can be completely useless, but it could also be very, very important. But if you describe what you're trying to do and where you're trying to do it and what happens, that would, in our experience at least, be almost always more important than the actual code snippet. So do we have any questions in the chat? No. And no more questions in the questions and answers. So yes, this is always the case. When I say we don't have any more, then they come. In terms of regions and languages, you've mentioned about including other languages. Yes, if I understand this correctly, more to come. If this has to do with this project, we are conducting the project, the kind of the working language is English, but we have the partners and the partner countries involved are from Germany, France, and Sweden. So those are the 4 languages that we provide the material, the training material in the curriculum. The project website and the deliverables are all in English. So the question here comes a little bit of clarification. It's about timing, specifically here about Spanish. Is there an estimated timing? So no, there's no estimated timing, but thank you for asking. And if you're interested in getting this in Spanish, then please do reach out to us, because we will not be able to do translations to all official EU languages, but we do have within the project a goal to upscale this to other regions and languages. And of course, Spanish would be natural because it's a large language area. But we haven't picked the regions yet. We are still discussing with disabled persons organizations and VAT providers where we can get most interest, because we don't want to postulate or push this out where nobody wants it. We would like to have a partner or somebody who is say that we are interested in using this, then we of course would try to cover that language. So please do reach out, and that goes for everyone who has more questions or thoughts or want to know more. And we are always happy to respond to your questions, and the email you can use is research@funka.com. So we will respond to any questions there. So let's see if we have any more questions coming in. So I'll try again to say that we don't have any more questions, and then we'll see if somebody else comes up with a question. That's like bringing an umbrella, because then it won't rain. Okay, I think this was the end. So it's now 3:26. So I will give you 4 minutes back of your afternoon. Please use it wisely. Do something accessible, and maybe also enjoy the weather. I would like to thank our fantastic interpreters, our captionists, and my colleagues, both Stefan, who is kind of behind the wheel here, and Peter, who is working on this project together with me, and the really lovely partners we have. We are not doing this alone. Thank you everyone for listening, and do reach out if you want to know more about the project, or if you're interested in working together with us with the scaling up of this. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.